Welcome, Kim, for FediForum. We very much appreciate you having here for everybody. Kim is a member of the EU Parliament and a member of the, I'm not going to say this right because I am not a Dutch-speaking person. So I consider the Green Party in the Netherlands and particularly interested in digital affairs and LGBT issues. And I think you are one of the most outspoken members in the European political environment on the kind of issues that we care about here at FediForum, which is, in a nutshell, how in the world are we going to interact better with each other online, and better meaning with less misinformation, with less addiction, with less manipulation, with all of these long lists of things that we all know. And FediForum is really a place where the people who build these things come together and not just build, but deploy and manage and run these kind of systems. We have a lot of people who build around open protocols like ActivityPub, and we have some people who build around Proto. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to sort of connect and see different parts of life, because we all basically working on a similar kind of thing. And it would be great to hear from you. You know, what is going on in the EU, and how are we going to make this all happen on a scale that matters? And so maybe let me.
That's a question, because that's going to take a bit longer than the time we have.
Right, you know, this is the 7th FediForum we have, and there is still so many things to do. So maybe you want to say a few words about, you know, how you got into this and why you care.
Yes, thank you so much. I always really like to be in the environment of the people that are actually giving me a weird nostalgic feeling about the internet, because you know, the internet used to be a place of creation, of creativity, about making sure you know, that we were connected in a way, but that we also looked out for each other on the internet. You know, like you had, of course, before social media, or a bit at the same time, you had a lot of forums where you could find people with the same hobbies, but then there were always people looking out for each other. And I think what is so great about, you know, this whole Fediverse movement and all the people that are in it, they're, you know, trying to go back, or actually forward. I think it's actually an updated version of that, to a place where, you know, we can actually make sure that you know, we are all part of the internet again, rather than some sort of consumer that is just with their addiction looking at social media. So I actually started working on digital affairs about 7 years ago. And of course, then the European Union was really set out to set up the new Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and the Artificial Intelligence Act. I myself worked a lot on the Artificial Intelligence Act, specifically, but also on the DSA to some extent. And at the end of the mandate, I realized, okay, we have now these 3 laws that are great, but the point of all this addiction we haven't really covered. And that's actually because I got quite addicted myself after being exhausted of working on the AI Act. And then I realized I'm on my phone all the time and I can't put it down. And a lot of people I worked with had exactly the same feeling. And we said, well, why not see what we could do about that? Because it seems that it's very purposefully designed in a way that it's completely addictive. And, you know, just thinking about, you know, the fact that if you scroll down or refresh a page that looks exactly like a slot machine, I think people might have thought about that when they designed it that way. And that's why I wrote a report on addictive design, not only on social media, but like on all online services and also devices, and to really fighting in consumer protection for the right not to be disturbed. Yeah, that's basically the right to, if you install an app or buy a new digital device, that, you know, it's actually non-addictive by design. I know it's radical, but that's the aim, and that's what I'm fighting for. And I'm very proud that I'm going to be also the shadow rapporteur on the upcoming Digital Fairness Act, which is all about consumer protection online, where what it looks like now, but big tech is fighting it a lot, it seems that we are going to actually make rules and maybe even ban certain addictive features that our brains can't handle.
Well, so, interesting enough, I think Europe at this point, if we look at it from a global perspective, is the center of where a lot of this activity is happening. And this is it's very good to see there's so many people committed to making progress in this direction. In a way, many of us have been around this particular part of technology for a long time. And a lot of the things we predicted 10 and 20 years ago was going to happen, if we were going down that route, actually happened. And in fact, a lot of worse things happened than we predicted too. And so the entire movement, there's a larger digital sovereignty movement in Europe and in other places that has sort of popped up in the last few years. But it popped up in the past few years. It didn't pop up 5, 10, 15 years ago. Why now? What's different? Why is this happening today from your vantage point? And who's pushing and who's resisting in turning the technology into the world we actually want as people, not just as billionaire overloads?
Well, I think it always helps to have a few scandals and a few whistleblowers. So that really helps. I think also, for example, Cambridge Analytica was a huge example, which really exposed the mechanisms and also gave, enough politicians the feeling like, okay, but this is something we could maybe change and do something about it. But I mean, for so many years, we've just been, thinking as policymakers, there's been just this idea of, well, the tech bros from Silicon Valley, they'll fix the world. So why bother them in that? And why would we even regulate? And I think that's been one of the biggest mistakes we've made. And when we finally realized this, then we started working on legislation, which was late, but better late than never, in my opinion. I think that's the one thing on the one hand. On the other hand, we're also having a lot of conversations, of course, about how in Europe, we are also too dependent on companies that are not European. How we are actually all only consuming our information from American and Chinese social media, and more and more also discussions about the fact that our most cloud services are not European. And we are really realizing now that most of our digital infrastructure on every level is US owned. And, we thought for a long time, like, if they're good at it, that's fine, that's efficient. But what we actually have created is complete systemic dependency. One of the numbers that always baffles me is that actually as EU, we're spending over 260 billion euros a year on US software and cloud services. And that is just something that people are starting to realize, that it doesn't only have an effect on our sovereignty, but also basically on the bottom line of Europe. And that's how you can actually get politicians together, both the more activist people like me and the people who are perhaps more looking at numbers than at, is this actually good for people?
So the way I understand, I think the way you just laid it out, I mean, the entire digital sovereignty movement is really encompassing most of tech in one way or another, right? From chip production on sort of the low level to cloud services to AI to everything, including social media. And if I'm looking at this from a pure financial perspective, recreating products and services that are internationally competitive at the scale that you're talking about is a very expensive undertaking. Right. I mean, we have this problem here, for example, in the Fediverse. There's a back of an envelope calculation floating around that says it costs about $1 or €1 a month per user to operate social media. And so if one were to extrapolate it to the level of the EU, then this is a significant amount of money. If we add in all the chips and the clouds and all of these other things, where does all the money come from? And more specifically, what our community asked us, where, if you're looking forward to having a more European, better form of social media, and it costs hundreds of millions or whatever it is of euros, is there Is there any chance that the EU might provide more public funding for this? Is it supposed to be industry funded? And if it is supposed to be industry funded, why wouldn't a European social media company end up more or less the same way as Facebook has for the same commercial pressures? And I'm asking you a lot of hard questions that I don't think anybody really has an answer to, but I think I wanted to bring these kinds of things up.
No, but these are all very fair questions. And also, it's a huge undertaking because we've just, for more than 20 years, we're like, no, we don't really have a problem. And of course, Trump was a great way of opening our eyes that we might have a problem. And I think what, when it comes to the money, that's brought up a lot. It's very expensive, but right now we're not even investing in our own European economy because we are, using so much digital infrastructure from other sides of the world. So in the end, it is better if we start investing in European companies. And if you look at the tenders that are being done for cloud services just by the European Commission, we're talking about billions, not about millions. So there we can really start making a change. So part of it really means that also we have to be front runners as governments and start giving contracts for many of the things to European companies and companies that are doing it well. So not only, big baddies from Europe, but also immediately look at, how do we make sure that these companies, platforms, infrastructure companies are safe by design and are already fulfilling all the legislation that we have in Europe. Because otherwise we're also not going to do it well. How I always see how we should address this, but I've already been fighting for this for 4 years, and it's time to it feels like it's getting high time. We should do a stress test, and we should just ask the European Commission, okay, what could go wrong if the US pulls the kill switch? What basic essential services that we are supposed to provide as governments can't we do anymore? That's the question. And then we see where the biggest vulnerabilities are, and we start with them. And then bit by bit, we make sure that we become more autonomous, we get better products, more privacy, more safety by design, more sustainability as well, because I think there we have a huge advantage. We don't have the buckets of money that we are putting into building new clouds and data centers. We need to be a bit more energy efficient there. So, step by step. But my problem is, right now, the first step is not taken yet. So step by step. Well, in next month, the European Commission will come with a tech sovereignty package. We're really interested to see what is going to be in that. There's a lot of different rumors about how they are going to define what actually a sovereign technology might be. So we're really on top of that, making sure that that's watertight and doesn't mean Amazon if they're very nice, basically.
It has always blown my mind that apparently various governments, including in the EU, are running the business of the government on software and services that are not domestic, which seems like one of the
all of them. It's all of them.
Okay, it blows my mind. It's
are on Microsoft. Every single thing is on Microsoft, and we don't see this as a problem because Microsoft is a nice company. They never had scandals like Facebook, that's sort of the vibe around it. No, and it's a huge issue. And the interesting thing is when you talk with European companies, they're incredibly frustrated because they would never be allowed to sell their technologies, their systems, their services to an American government, not even at the lowest level. And we're just like, yes, please come in. So it's a frustrating situation.
Yes. So the one of the questions is, as you push forward in your context, how can people in our community or constituents help? Is there particular issues we can raise? Is there particular support we can provide? How do we multiply our efforts in order to accomplish more? Do you have any particular ideas?
Well, actually, I think in my own country, the Netherlands, there's very interesting things happening. Just because it's becoming outrageous enough, I guess. Because we have a digital identity system called DigiD, and the company that is running that system is being sold to an American company, and there's outrage and outcries all over society. Doesn't matter from left to right, everyone is against this, and this is like all the time when this is brought up. People are also bringing up other things like the fact that we're all dependent on Microsoft, and of course also the international courts are in The Hague, where they actually switched the kill switch of one of the judges who was investigating the genocide in Israel. So, this is sort of what is happening there. And it was very interesting that all these things accumulated in a huge discussion on our autonomy. And actually, these kind of things are now being discussed at the national level. And it's because people from your community pushing this and every time saying, hey, look, this is another thing which is related to this other scandal. And I think we need that. And it's actually, I'm quite proud to be a bit of a nerd. And I think we need these nerds that are on top of this, who are just ringing the alarm bell over and over. Because what I'm noticing is as soon as you start talking about the problem, yay, I see other nerds in the group chat. When when other people see the problem of this dependence, and and especially right now with Trump, people are very scared. Then you can actually also, the next step is talking about alternatives. And it has created a lot of opportunity to talk about the great alternatives there are, and the things and all the discussions. You have also the proposal of Eurostack, which is super interesting, how that has spread. And then there's all these people who are, creating websites where you can find the alternatives. Talk shows start talking about it. Even comedy shows are starting to talk about it. So it's a snowball effect, and we really, really need your community as the start. And then the second thing we need to do is just make sure that public money goes to systems that are good, and not big tech. And that is the second part that we are really fighting for right now, new public procurement rules.
So related to this one, there's a question of what is good and what isn't, and I think, of course, if I were a American company, a lobbyist in Europe, I would of course claim that my product is just as good as anything else. What is there some kind of place where that discussion occurs, what is good and what isn't? I mean, you of course have now a lot of laws on the books that in a way define some versions of good, or at least say this is clearly bad. Would you say that these, one of the questions we got was, would you say that by and large, these laws are serving the purpose as intended, and they have actually created a behavioral change in some companies, or are we still in the litigation slash fighting the law kind of stage? How do you see that, shake out? Because on the other hand, as European alternatives become available that presumably are meeting these laws from the get-go, then the competitive situation also becomes different.
Yes. Well, I think these are two questions actually. So where the discussion is happening on what is a good company, you don't want to know. It's all over the place because Amazon, this is their big fight right now. Amazon has bought every billboard in Brussels, is sponsoring every newsletter. When you take a train to Brussels, when you take a plane to Brussels, it's all Amazon, Amazon, Amazon. And what are they saying? How Amazon is making sure that European companies thrive through their cloud services. Amazon good, that's what they're saying. And then there's a lot of discussion. Okay, how do we make these definitions? And that's going to be quite tricky. And that is also one of the things that these discussions are being had. I am noticing that the discussions are becoming broader than just European. It's also way more, I hear the word open source, which was sort of a no-go word for the right wing in the parliament for a while, like being something that's positive because we have a big open source community in Europe. That's something we should foster. So it is actually going broader. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
How do you see the legislation that's on the books as having made an impact?
How the legislation is changing things. Well, to some extent, it is changing things. But the interesting thing is that because the enforcement doesn't go very fast, there's actually a lot of European companies that are already following the rules, and we're already way more decent than some of these big tech cowboys, are very frustrated. And they come to us like, okay, we thought we would finally have a fair playing field now, and that's still not the case. So there's some frustration there for good reasons. So that's still something that is being hashed out. I think, when you have a very progressive vision on how the internet should be and how it should not only be a super for-profit capitalist machine, then I don't think the laws that we have so far are strong enough. If you want just basic decency that is a bit the same level as how our society is working, I think we are getting there with these laws. And I think it is, creating change. And at least we now also have more and more guidelines that are just explaining that if you start a new company, this is the sort of basic standards that you need to have. But before we go to fully privacy friendly, etc., as a standard, there's still some work to do, because the GDPR, which I think is a great way of how we have created behavioral change, not only in Europe but elsewhere in the world, is now under attack by big tech and the European Commission. So there's still steps to be taken to make sure that stays watertight.
So I just want to say, as somebody who grew up in Germany and lives in America and hangs out with the international community, I think one of the great exports that the EU has had in the recent years is the GDPR. It seems to have been referenced everywhere, and the fact that Europe has been pushing forward so much has enabled other things in other places. For example, here in the US, we have now a grassroots effort around the thing called the Digital Choice Act, which is on a level of the states and is being adopted in multiple places. And it requires, among other things, interoperability between social media platforms and the ability to move your data from one place to another. These kinds of things would not be possible without what the EU is doing. And many people around the world have the exact same problem, or many jurisdictions have the same problem as the EU has. How is one of the things we're always trying to do is connect those people. Is there some how do you see that happening? Is what's in the EU, is this really more inward focused? This is what we do for us in the EU, or you could start the international coalitions for better whatever.
Yes, no, this is absolutely one of the things. Like we always see it also like this. Also, when we were working on the DSA, DMA. And on the AI Act, we were hoping indeed to make sure that we could set a new standard for the internet and the online world. And then, of course, MAGA went mayhem, and they are really, really, really pushing against this. And it's actually, interestingly enough, one of the biggest things that they are pushing for from the White House now is to stop our tech laws. Even the threats they're doing on tariffs and all those kind of things and trade deals, that's so much based on these kind of threats that, you have to get rid of your tech laws, otherwise we will impose tariffs on your car industry, to such an extent that right now the European Commission has said, sure, we will have a structural dialogue with the United States about our tech laws. Our tech laws. I don't know what, I also once had a meeting with someone who works for the European Commission, and the White House had sent a letter about the fact that they didn't like the AI Act. And we were like, what are you going to reply? And it's like, we don't even know how to reply. It's not in our mandate to answer to a foreign government. So yeah, it's a really bizarre situation.
It's I think we are, as we say in the US, we are not in Kansas anymore. The situation has become very weird. One of the questions I've been getting from our audience here is, so what do you tell the people both on the legislative side and in the commission that are under pressure from specifically the current US administration, where all sorts of things that really shouldn't have anything to do with each other are suddenly connected in ways of, you do this, then we will hurt you over here. What do you tell them? Because there's also real costs that the American administration can impose. What is an avenue here that is viable?
Well, I think what is the most important thing to tell people is just that we can do it. And it's sometimes very sad to see that we are sort of almost losing faith in that Europe can actually, it has talent, has interesting companies, has innovative ideas. Actually, a lot of the talent that works for big tech companies is European. Like we are really good at creating talent. We do a lot of extremely important fundamental research in Europe because we have very good funding systems for our universities. And big tech has been telling us, you can't do it. No, only we can be, as big, as cool. And so many people have started believing in that. And actually on my journey now in working more and more on tech sovereignty, I'm meeting so many cool people with brilliant ideas, brilliant companies. That I always really feel like, come on, it almost feels like they're purposefully ignoring the cool people from Europe in order to make their point that we need to deregulate or something. So that is actually the main thing I tell them. So also, if you know any cool initiatives, please share them with me. That's really helpful because I need to ramp up the confidence of the EU people sometimes a little bit.
Yeah, I think if there's opportunities that exist to basically showcase things that is possible, I think we should always collaborate to do this, because I think there's many people who simply cannot believe it can be done. A personal anecdote: I grew up in Germany and I went through the German university system. And when the Americans showed up in some kind of meeting, he was always treated as the expert for some reason that I didn't understand it at the time. But then I moved to the United States and I traveled on behalf of an American company to Germany. And all of a sudden, I was the expert. I was thinking, what just happened? The only thing that happened is that I'm now moving that I'm living in a different country. There's an attitudinal change, I think, on all parts required. The Americans are not just the experts. There's lots of expertise around. But we are sort of getting towards the end of the time that we have for this. Maybe we could end on a note of, if everything goes reasonably well. I mean, nothing always gets perfectly well, but if everything goes reasonably well, a few years out, say 5 years out, how do you see the European technology landscape and the impact it has on society?
Well, in some sort of dream world, it's completely sustainable and it doesn't really harm the environment so much anymore as a baseline, because this really worries me, how this rapid increase of emissions because of the AI push. And next to that, based on that, I think we should really make sure that everything is addiction free by design, privacy by design, safe by design, and in my dream world, also collaborative by design. These kind of fundamental things should not be in the hands of a few individuals and a few shareholders. And that's why I think it is extremely important that we keep fostering these kind of ideals. A while ago, I was asked to open, we have, library buses in the region I'm originally from. And I was asked to open one to talk actually about the digital aspect of society. And it was all about how libraries bring people together. And it's like the internet could bring people together again. And especially when you have, systems that are federated, where actually you can grasp again who is on the internet with you. Maybe it's, a server that is just run by everyone from your village. Actually we are then connected again, rather than worried that someone will not like us, because we actually know and meet eye to eye also in real life. So that is my hope, and it's a world where being human is valued rather than technology.
On that beautiful note, thank you very, very much for making the time to talk to us today. I certainly enjoyed it. And I am sure that there will be follow-up discussions here at FediForum as we go to the rest of the event. And I'm sure we all will stay in touch, because we're working on the same goal in some other ways.
Yes, and absolutely reach out if you have cool initiatives, because I can always also use inspiration.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Ciao.